Ladies and gents, welcome back to another Engineers Podcast. Today I'm joined by Catherine Jew, co-founder at Kernel. Kernel are building web agents in a crazy fast, open source way for them to be able to access the internet. We've got all sorts of discussions around the technical, product, and business challenges that throw up something as ambitious as this. As we always do, we'll be getting to know the founders behind the idea, and we're really interested in breaking down what it looks like to build in the open source space as well. Without further ado, Catherine, do you want to give us a bit of an intro into you and your background?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Elliot, on the pod. My name is Catherine Jew, co-founder and CEO of Kernel. I am have spent most of my entire career in the startup world. So I studied linguistics and computer science at UCLA and ended up founding a YC-backed company straight out of college. This was during the last AI wave, the pre-transformer AI wave. And so people were very excited about AI at the time, but that mostly meant supervised machine learning. LLMs were not really in, barely beyond a research paper at that point. By coincidence, I've always spent my career in the world of APIs and data infrastructure. And so, over the course of working at startups after my company, and then most recently leading a team at Cash App, really just have a love for developer tools and building foundational building blocks that enable others to build really interesting applications on top of that. And so, over the course of the past 10 years, have been keeping up with the innovations that have happened from supervised ML to unsupervised ML to then the transformer wave. And I was at Cash App, at the company I was working at most recently, before starting Kernel, that I saw what felt like a really watershed moment to me. And that was when cloud computer use came out, that model of, hey, not only can an LLM, read, predict, and understand text, but it also can understand, if you give it a screenshot of a desktop computer, it can actually navigate and figure out what to do next. And there was a pair team that I sat next to that when that model came out, I saw them starting to tinker with that model to automate QA of their various QA functions, and just became very, very convinced, thought the technology was super cool, was very convinced that, back when they first released it, the model was slow and unreliable, but it was only going to get better if you look at how AI has accelerated in its innovation and capabilities in a very short amount of time. And from there became very invested and interested in building the cloud infrastructure environments required to make those sort of computer use models possible. And that's what led me to start working with my co-founder Raf, who's our CTO, and was the co-founder of Clever before Kernel, and got us to get start on what eventually became Kernel as we know it today.
Love it. That's some really good context. I do actually want to dive into the model release and what prompted the idea for you to actually start thinking about this is what we could do with web agents. Like, walk me through that moment where the idea pops in your mind, pops in your team's mind, and then you actually start forming an idea, forming a business. Like, walk us through that.
Yeah, 100%. Um, so when cloud computer use came out, computer use, even in its name, talks about this concept of the models being able to understand desktop applications. And I think in its earliest days, when you see a new technology, you're not trying. You're in some ways trying to take that technology and figure out where you can apply it, especially in the world of LLMs and AI. But even within the first couple months of that model being released, if you're on the ground with developers who are interested in models and tinkering with AI, you basically saw almost all of them try to use it to operate browsers. Browsers are really the gateway to the internet, and the internet is where almost all work happens today. You do have, of course, legacy industries still operating desktop applications, and there's kind of a large space of like modernizing relics of old industries. That is certainly kind of an opportunity for computers as well. But when you look at what are the bleeding edge applications of computer use, how do we automate work? How do we make work more efficient? It's really operating through the browser, because of the fact that pretty much every service is offered as a web app today. And so that was kind of what was happening, kind of on the grounds as that model was coming out. Raf and I kind of then went into just doing a ton of user deep dives, user research, talking to folks that we knew were building, computer use models in that space, whether that be in the QA world, whether that be in the e-commerce world, which is what I saw at Cash App. I've, again, having kind of been indoctrinated in the startup world since college, very familiar with kind of that 0 to 1 deep dive into user pain points and really suss out what is the like true pain that people are experiencing in their existing workflows, and then how can we turn that into a really amazing product that delights them. From a business perspective, Raf and I have a fundamental belief that with this AI wave, there's an opportunity to build a new AI native infrastructure company. And so that's always been one of our North Stars. We're really interested in cloud infrastructure and what are the primitives required by AI applications that have different paradigms than were used to exist in the pre-LLM world. One example, before agents, LLMs, it was really just you had a request response pattern, right? You send a request to a server, you get back a response very, very quickly. You never have to worry about long latency, long running, stateful applications. And now we are in this world where, the model itself can take many, many seconds to come back. It may be calling many tools. It may be calling it might be saving state and context. And that paradigm from a technical perspective, we think is just like a very interesting thing to build our API around. And it enables us to, I think, expose primitives and API surfaces that are really just AI native and AI first. And that's kind of something that we're very, very excited about with Kernel.
While we're here, can you talk about what some of those challenges look like? I wanted to come to that a little bit later, but we're right in the deep of it. Let's talk about what some of those engineering challenges look like, those product or user experience challenges actually look like on the ground.
Yeah. So before, if you look at even the most basic implementation from Anthropic, when they released computer use, they shared an open source reference implementation, which basically put, an agent loop with their model in a Docker container with Chrome installed. And, Anthropic basically said, hey, if you want to like once you figure out how to build, you've built an agent that works locally, that can navigate your desktop or your computer. When you're ready to take it to production, you're going to have to go figure that yourself. You're going to have to deploy that Docker container somewhere. We're leaving it up to you. We're not going to actually host any of this for you. And if you are a software engineer who has tried putting Chrome in a Docker container, you quickly run into a number of just annoying infrastructure challenges. Stack Overflow, which is now a relic. If you can find many, many articles about hey, I can't get Chrome to launch in the Docker container. It keeps crashing, or what are all these random flags? What do they mean? How do I turn them off? How do I turning off one crashes it? We're turning on the other, it does not. And even getting that infrastructure up in a local way is annoying. And then let's say you want to actually run your agent in production. You want to scale your agent. You have end customers, and all of those customers need an agent with a browser. Then you quickly are thinking about managing that instance at scale, and kind of scaling that infrastructure. And all of those add up to kind of a compounding number of annoying infrastructure challenges that we, the more we went into that world, saw that it was really limiting, an application, an agent builder from being able to take their agent into production. And so our deep thesis is if we can solve that problem for them, make it super easy, serverless where they can pay per use, scale, they don't have to think too much about it. And we kind of handle all of those nitty gritty, annoying details of running desktop VMs or specifically browsers in the cloud. We can hopefully add to the growing pie of making it easier and more effective to build agents that actually work in production.
Love it. Can you actually walk us through some use cases of where you're seeing teams and customers use Kernel?
Yeah. Speaking maybe first to the first one that I saw at Cash App. So this was a QA engineering team that was trying to QA not their websites, not like Cash.app or Block's websites, but actually partner websites. So Cash App works with e-commerce companies like Nordstrom and Levi to offer a pay for with Afterpay product. And so if you've ever been to an e-commerce website, you've seen that, right? Paying for with Afterpay, paying for with PayPal. And before AI, before LLMs, it was actually like not possible to automate that QA. For one thing, Block is a public company. They work with thousands of merchants. If that engineering team was tasked with writing scrapers for every single website by hand, really just an impossible, like doing that thousands, maintaining them every single time the website changed, just really an impossible task. And then, of course, also from the lens of, well, the other solution historically has been like, you have a team of like human QA people who are just, going through the website on a daily or weekly or monthly basis, also fairly ineffective. And so the LLM kind of breakthrough is really unique in that they now have an agent powered by Kernel that says like, you can imagine a template prompt like, hey, go to insert variable name website.com. Click on a product. We don't care which product, actually. Like, just you, the LLM, can choose a product. And then look for, paying for, did it do the math calculation right? Is the logo there? Is it the right color? Is it the right branding? LLMs can do all of those kind of non-deterministic judgment tasks. And so that's just one of my favorite use cases I like to talk about. Since Cash App, kind of as Kernel has scaled, we see use cases kind of across the board in what I like to describe as like, fairly like large, sometimes old school, but like really critical underpinnings of society, whether that be, the health tech space has, needs so much more efficiency, and lots of startups trying to able to now deliver that efficiency using the old school rails. Often old school healthcare companies or records do not have APIs. And so being able to automate, building automations across what I call human rails, that is the browser. That's a very common one. Automating insurance codes, medical claims. We see things in the supply chain industry, whether it be automating old school procurement portals to kind of bring real-time data into the end customer experience. Auto submitting, forms as required. And then lastly, the e-commerce industry is seeing a ton of activity in the agent space, whether that be real-time price intelligence, whether that be catalog QA, or even just, automating end-to-end checkout flows. ChatGPT today can surface recommendations for what to buy. But where I expect we're headed is it's eventually we'll be purchasing on your behalf and making sure that experience works really well for Elliot is the small role that Kernel aims to play in that.
Love it. It's actually a really useful chain for companies looking to eliminate manual repetitive tasks. Like a couple of the examples that you've given, especially the Cash App examples, the healthcare, medical checking examples, I think are great for someone to understand where this is perfect for. I do want to touch on a couple of points that I think we spoke about on the phone. security anticipated problems or challenges that are likely to come up in the future? Like, walk us through, I guess, some of the challenges. They're not necessarily technical challenges, they're probably more business challenges that you are walking into.
We often at Kernel are thinking about what the next capabilities that agents will be able to deliver in this kind of march towards being able to automate or do any task that a human can. And so, one of the biggest unlocks that we're really excited about is what does it look like for an AI agent to not just read data, transfer data, turn data from one format to another, but actually write data. So act on behalf of Elliot, the person, potentially with his credentials, with his accounts. And then how do you do that in a secure, sanctioned way where Elliot is involved in that consent and, authorization? The developer does not is able to give that agent's credentials in a secure manner, doesn't have to store and touch them themselves. And then for the end website, and this is, I would say the industry has not yet solved this problem. For the end website, know that an agent that is coming to their site actually has, is not fraud, not DDoS, but actually, Elliot's assigned agent who they've actually, Elliot has consented to.
That's a really interesting one to try and solve.
And you kind of see it happening today. You can ask, Claude Desktop to open a tab on your browser. And in your local browser, you do have most of your logins already, the cookies are saved. You're probably already logged into most websites. And Claude is increasingly, capable of doing an arbitrary task that you give it with your local browser. And then, so as you think about, okay, the local experience from a technology perspective, Claude and the models are able to increasingly do arbitrary tasks on your behalf. That is, can happen locally on your local browser today. The moment that you want to do things like schedule a task, I want my agent to run on Monday morning at 6 a.m. every single day, run through my email, run through, check my calendar, do X, Y, and Z. That workload actually ends up shifting to the cloud. And so at that point in time, we have this kind of deep, both infrastructure and kind of technical and business challenge of, okay, how that works locally because Elliot was always logged into his computer. How do we bring that context into the cloud, as well as keeping it super secure? Obviously, OpenClaw is kind of bringing a lot of excitement to this concept of agents doing things on your behalf. And so in any context, locally, personal Mac Mini or in the cloud, we are thinking a lot about how to kind of pass authorization, authentication, and logs for across the board in a very secure way on Kernel's platform.
Love it. That's some really good context and an interesting one to solve. And while we're on the topic of OpenClaw, there's been a lot of success stories in the open source space. Lovable, who we've had on the show, very early days, open source, OpenClaw, Tavily, many others that I've seen. Talk to us a little bit about your experience of building in the open source space.
So I would say 95% of Kernel is open source, and that mostly came from just Raf and I being developers. And, as a developer, you end up wanting to build things. You build things in a way that you wish others built for you. And so we originally got our start launching an open source project that put a browser on a unikernel. You can think of a unikernel as kind of like a fork of a micro VM. So highly secure, fully isolated, kind of minimal set of requirements that you can launch a single application onto. We launched it open source because we candidly thought it was very cool. No one had done it before we had. And we thought it might intrigue other developers who were tinkering in the open source space. And that launch went really, really well. And kind of as a result, we've just continued building things in the open source. The current project that we're working on is called Hype Man. It's an open source control plane that allows companies like Kernel, but also sandbox companies. You might think of like an E2B or a Modal, a control plane for all of our companies that require highly secure, isolated sandboxes to launch a control plane for them to launch and be and kind of manage the life cycle of. As we think about kind of being part of the general developer community and growing as this space matures as well, we are always on the lookout for really interesting projects that are open source that we can contribute to, whether that be contributing skills to various skills directories, or Vercel launched a project called Agent Browser recently, which was their take on a very efficient framework that uses a model to basically drive a browser. It's something that we just care a lot about as a team and part of our culture. And we've had the fortune of working with venture capitalists and investors who deeply believe in the ability to build a really successful large business while also being open source. So I've never really had to contend with that challenge either.
Love it. That's a good one. I like that. We are going to take a little bit of a dive back to some of the engineering challenges. We've touched on them, but when we were talking about where models are progressing, you're looking to build an AI native infrastructure company, or in this space, particularly thinking about cloud infrastructure and thinking about latency. These are things that I know that you're really dialed into, and creating a really good experience for people actually using Kernel. Walk us through what that looks like, solving some of those challenges under the hood on a day-to-day at Kernel, and other engineering challenges that you find tricky.
Yeah, 100%. It's also kind of an interesting, question of why Kernel. If you've seen our website, we really, really talk about being crazy fast. That's something that we hang our hat upon. We benchmark aggressively. We're always trying to improve. Why we do that in the first place came from our observations talking to users that, hey, even if I manage to get Chrome and Docker, it's very, very slow. Chrome, because of its natural limitations, takes anywhere from 10 to 40 seconds to spin up. And so it's such an odd experience as a developer to, you're used to an API giving you something back and hopefully no more than a couple of seconds, but to have to wait 40 seconds for that API to return, that's a really crazy, odd experience. And so that was the original inklings in which we wanted to innovate from a technical perspective to make that possible. We have continued to invest in that, but one of the most why we continue to invest in it is not just because that's what we've become known for, but we actually discovered along the way that by enabling highly performant infrastructure for agents, we can actually expand new use cases that otherwise would not be possible. And so the example I think of that I'm really, really excited about is the growing, productivity of voice AI agents. They are used on the front lines of phone calls, for your bank, for, some sort of operator. And so there's a human on the other end of that line. And, voice agents, if you investigate that space, the latency is really, really critical because a human is not going to wait even a second for someone to respond. And so once that agent is not just responding to a human, but let's say they actually need to go do things in response to, whatever that interaction was, they want to go spin up a browser. That browser also needs to be highly performant, moving very quickly, enabling that agent to then go take action. And if the infrastructure powering that browser or the task that they're trying to do is slow in and of itself, that whole like category use case really breaks down. And so I, I deeply believe that as we see more and more kind of real world use cases that involve serving humans and customers at the other end of the line, highly performant infrastructure that Kernel builds uh, really just expands the total set of what can be done with agents. And that's a long-winded kind of rabbit hole of why we even do it in the first place. Maybe I actually kind of forgot your question, so you can ask it.
I think that's a good enough use case. Anyway, you actually triggered something in my mind. We spoke to Russ and LiveKit probably 6 to 9 months ago, and it kind of moves us on to the category question of there's a lot of people building in the voice AI space. We could probably list a few names. I'd be interested to understand not necessarily who's building in your space, but areas that you're leaning into, i.e., infrastructure, because you recognize the importance of how it interlinks across other businesses in this tool chain. But what areas are you really leaning into to become that category defining web agent, if you like?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something we are thinking about a lot in 2026. The space of agents, LLMs, infrastructure is just candidly a very exciting one to be building in, because there is so much greenfield, so many paradigms of the ways things used to work are now completely broken. And that exists both, at the infrastructure dev tool layer, but it also, of course, exists at the vertical AI layer that a lot of Kernel customers are focused on, which is, they are now operating at orders of magnitude more efficient, cheaper than the prior art before LLMs. I would break down what I see as the let's call it like 100 or 1,000x opportunities that we are excited to support and contribute to. One is, coding edge agents generally. They are so incredibly good today, increasingly truly agentic, increasingly, autonomous, can be done, can be invoked in an asynchronous background sort of way and do a task end to end. They don't always need access to the internet, but in many cases they do, whether that be to look at docs, whether that to be run the code the web app code that it generated on a staging URL and then go automatically QA it. There's, giving it access to a browser just makes it more and more powerful. And so that is an area that Kernel, we're very, very focused on making sure that Kernel is the best browser for those coding agents. The second one I alluded to a little bit earlier, which is this concept of like scheduled tasks or background tasks. Today, you in your Claude desktop or Claude Code, you're very synchronous with it. But I think looking towards how coding agents are moving more to the background, when we look at things like Anthropic Cowork or agents that are acting outside of the coding context, my belief is that work will follow a similar trajectory as where coding agents have gone. And those are probably the two that I can think of at the moment that we're most excited about. I mean, there's just kind of an explosion of, an agent doing various tasks, and whether it needs to check its own work, grab styles from, grab information from the internet. All of those are very, very exciting for us to be focused on.
I know I am stating the obvious, but it's very exciting. And as you rightly put, 100x, 1000x opportunity where all of these companies are building in their separate categories, and you've got a real opportunity to latch onto them. Coding agent, as an example, workflow management tools that are being built left, right, and center. You've got an opportunity to build on top of them. So it's exciting. what bets are you making over the course of 2026? There's a lot of ambiguity. There always is with AI and post LLMs in the last couple of years, but what are the bets that you're placing?
Yeah, I would say two core beliefs about 2026. The first is this concept of agents acting on behalf of users with their consents. And so we're thinking a lot about that and launching products. So we have a product called Managed Auth that we launched earlier this month that aims to make that consent, authorization, authentication problem seamless for developers and the end users who are giving agents permissions to do things on their behalf. I think there's lots of work with partners as well to enable protocol level handshakes of that information to make sure that all of that stays very, very secure. Um, and then the other area that we are thinking a lot about is, um, you know, to we're moving to a world where the agent is making the decision on its own. And what are the unique properties of agents that humans cannot do because of our own limitations? Agents can parse lots and lots of information. They can tirelessly look through logs to find, the kernel that, enables them to go figure out the right next step. And so as we think about our product from an API perspective, we're increasingly thinking, how does an agent really want to be interacting with that browser? How do we expose observability and tools and events and controls that's that are uniquely suited for an agent that a human would not the human might find overwhelming? Just as an example, it would take me hours or days to look through network logs, to try to like pinpoint an issue. Give that to an agent and it can almost probably in real time, parse through that very, very quickly, find that issue and make an adjustment, in the matter of seconds or minutes. And so that, as from an API and product perspective, that informs us of like, hey, instead of restricting too much information, like restricting information and trying to guardrail or minimize context for the agent, that's actually like, what is it really good at? It's actually really good at parsing information. So how can we as a product and API for developers expose more and more observability to the agent so it has more context and can make better decisions faster? Those are the two kind of paradigm shifts that we're really focused on this year.
The second one's a really interesting one that I haven't really thought about and I haven't really explored with other people, building in a way to supplement your own agents with the right tooling. People are talking about building AI tooling for humans and in that loop itself, but no one's really talking about tooling for agents per se. So a nice bet. Where are you looking to grow the team if you are doubling down in those areas at the moment? Who are you looking to hire and who would be great to walk into the Kernel team and why?
I would say from a philosophical perspective, Kernel tries to hire very carefully and thoughtfully, but, also very aggressively because we are, trying to keep up with all the excitement that's happening in the AI space. As an engineering first company, we have taken a stance of, let's bring kernel developers as close to the customer as possible, both because as developers, we can have an intuition about the right product surfaces to expose and minimizing that time between customer feedback into, hey, I can go ship that with an agent, within the matter of hours or days is really important to our velocity. And so we've really taken a focus on hiring technical folks in all parts of the business. Even kind of like if you look at our go-to-market and marketing team, we've really focused on hiring, people who have been software engineers who are now interested in marketing or former sales engineers who are now flexing into sales itself. And that's a culture that we think is really critical to enable, best in class developer tools, best in class product velocity, and serving kind of our ICP, which is really a technical audience. I would say we hire across three buckets. One is looking for infrastructure engineers, people interested in micro VMs, control planes, security and isolation. We're always looking for really amazing people who are interested in that space. From a product engineering perspective, we look for folks who think about the world in terms of API interfaces. Even if you're working on the front end of a dashboard, that is in some ways, one implementation of an API primitive, and looking for folks who think about the world in that regard is really important for us. And then the third area that we're hiring a lot for is a role we call customer engineering. These are software engineers who split their time 50-50 between kind of software engineering and direct customer, support, customer engineering, coding, and that sort of thing. One of the ways that we're trying to evolve this function, which maybe historically has been called, whether it's technical account management or technical customer support, is, hey, we now have coding agents that can code product features, with skills or, autonomously. That should exist in support as well. And if we are able to build agents that can auto triage bugs better and faster than a human can, it's going to benefit everyone involved. It allows us as a business to keep our footprint relatively light. It enables our customers and developers to, report and resolve issues faster, and hopefully everyone benefits. So that's something we're hiring pretty aggressively for as well.
Love it. I think it goes without saying for anyone listening, if you are deeply technical, but as Catherine said, in the infrastructure space, micro VMs, control planes, product engineering, and you're really thinking about how customers are interacting with your product, your dashboards, thinking about observability, APIs, plus the customer engineer role, you should definitely be talking to her and Raf. I do want to say a massive thanks for coming to join us. You've been excellent. I wish you all the success. And I know that there's going to be a success story that comes from this with what you guys and girls are building. So really good luck.
Thanks so much, Elliot. It was a pleasure to be on.
Pleasure. And for everyone listening, all of your likes, shares, subscribership, and all that good stuff keeps this little ecosystem buzzing around, and I get an opportunity to talk to amazing people like Catherine. So continue to do that. And again, Catherine, thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Hey guys, thanks for watching this episode. Massively appreciate you listening and checking in with us. If you want to find out more about us and what we're doing, please check us out on social media. What we're trying to do at Enginears is build a community to drive knowledge sharing and experiences. On Twitter, we can be found at Enginears.io. It's no underscore. We've also got a website, which is enginears.io. These links will all be posted in the description. Any feedback and comments are massively appreciated. We're always looking to improve on where we can. Thanks, guys.